Welcome back, rail fans, and welcome to the conversation if you're a newcomer to this channel. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on one of two of the best-selling diesel locomotive models in history, EMD's 38 and 40 series diesels. If you're knowledgeable of locomotive history, then I don't need to explain to you what makes the 38 and 40 series EMD diesel so special, so I won't. What I will tell you is that in this video we'll be focusing on the unique oddballs of these locomotive classes, including the high hoods of NS and the 6-axle 38s of the Reading and Northern. But first, a little Alco update coming straight out of Delaware. It's November 18, 2025, and we're looking over Taylor, Pennsylvania, and down at the south end of Taylor Yard. You can't really tell, but there's an extremely rare diesel down there en route to the Delaware-Lackawanna Von Storch locomotive shops. Former Maryland and Delaware RS3M. The Maryland and Delaware had at least two of these extremely rare birds. The RS3M is a former Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Alco that has an EMD 567 prime mover. It was converted by Conrail at their DeWitt shops, I think, and they're known as DeWitt Jeeps. The one here with us today is now the DL number 914, and I'm told that there may be two more coming. One to be used for spare parts. At the north end of the yard is another rare locomotive, a former Norfolk and Western high hood SD40-2, number 1632. There were no less than 4 different classes of ex-N&W SD40s on the Norfolk Southern at their height. The 1632 is among 11 such locos that made up the class of 1973. This 3,000 horsepower Survivor has dual control stands in the cab, enabling it to run either long or short hood forward, and it's wired for remote control operations. This particular locomotive brought out the rail fans unlike any locomotive that I've seen since the NKP Berkshire number 765 came to town in 2015. I'll leave a link to that video in the description box just in case you missed it. I saw a lot of cars with New York and New Jersey license plates chasing this engine. Unfortunately for all of its celebrity status, the locomotive is being returned north to Binghamton, New York because of problems with the cooling system. That's why it's sitting here at the north end of Taylor waiting to be picked up by the next K82 turn job. From what I was told, there were problems with the Smart Start system. Allegedly, this engine has a built-in safety feature that automatically dumps water from the system when the temperature falls below 30 degrees, which it did this morning to prevent freezing. Apparently that happened, resulting in the engine suffering from low water. Strange to me, since it was always my impression that the railroads kept their engines running in the wintertime to prevent the water from freezing. In fact, I did a deep dive into the cooling systems of modern-day diesel locomotives in video T380. Here's a snippet taken from that video. The vast majority of locomotives on the road today utilize simple tap water for coolant in their radiator systems. Water is much more efficient at transferring heat than a mix of water and antifreeze that's typically found in your car's radiator system. Benefits of using water allow the overall size of the radiator system to be smaller due to its higher efficiency, the lower cost of water compared to an antifreeze water mixture, and water's ubiquity. Any garden or water hose that can reach a locomotive can add fluid to the radiator system in a pinch. There are also environmental concerns with using antifreeze since the water system needs to be drained occasionally for maintenance. To keep the radiator system in top shape, a corrosion inhibitor is added to the water. This additive protects the system from developing rust, corrosion, and scaling. I'll leave a link to the full video in the description box just in case you missed it. Whatever the case, the crews called it junk, but I was fortunate enough to catch it 4 days earlier on November 14, crossing Depot Road as it exits Taylor to perform the day's switching duties. Among all of the things that make this engine so unique, best of all is this engine still retains its original Leslie RS5T air horn, the sound of the Norfolk and Western's railroad diesel years. So with all of that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy this video on EMD's best-selling locomotives, the 38s and the 40s. Norfolk Southern has the distinction of being the last Class 1 mainline operator of high hood locomotives. Number 3266 is a former Southern Railway high hood SD40-2 that was built in 1978. Sadly, there are no Southern Railway high hood SD40-2s on the Norfolk Southern locomotive roster today. This one is shown in 2004 on the siding at Buttonwood, PA, along with the Gray Ghost -9 waiting for the next Bow, New Hampshire coal train to push to Albany, New York. Also take note of the 6-step configuration of the -9 as opposed to the 4-step configuration of the high hood. GP38-2 number 5254 was built in 1979 for Southern Railway subsidiary CNOTP. That's the Cincinnati, New Orleans, Texas, and Pacific. It has remote control and was rebuilt in 2017 with a spiffy new Admiral cab at the shops of Juniata, Pennsylvania. And on a side note, as this video is recorded in November of 2025, the Norfolk Southern bought the CNOTP line from the city of Cincinnati outright about 2 years ago for around $2.5 billion. Although it's hard to tell, that second locomotive is a high hood GP50 of the Southern Railway. 50 of these 3,500 horsepower Jeeps were inherited by the Norfolk Southern in 1982, and it's shown here dashing through the snow of Buttonwood in December of 2003, bracketing an ex-Conrail C39-8, even more rare at the time, and the -9 number 9612. The high-powered Jeeps of the 7000 number series have since been reconfigured into 2,000 horsepower GP38-3s and renumbered. Note the missing middle radiator fan on top of the long hood. Surprisingly enough, some of the Southern's most famous high hoods aren't EMD locomotives. Deep in the interior of the Volunteer State are some of the rarest high hoods of them all.
Welcome you to Crossville, Tennessee, located in the heart of the Cumberland Plateau. You can see behind me here some of the places that you can get to from the center of Crossville. You can literally get anywhere.
For this video, our interest lies in the Volunteer State of Tennessee. The Laas Railroad, formerly known as the Franklin Industrial Minerals Railroad, operates 16 miles of a former Southern Railway line from Rockwood, Tennessee, west to Crab Orchard, where the company's quarry and processing plant are located. The line was built by the Tennessee Central Railway and its predecessors in the 1880s and 1890s as part of the line connecting Nashville with the Southern Railway at Emory Gap. Eventually, the line would become part of the 286-mile route between Harriman, Tennessee, and Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Harriman is something along the lines of a division point on the CNOTP. Unfortunately, the Tennessee Central never truly achieved financial solvency, and the end finally came in 1968 when the railroad was divided up among the connecting railroads, with the eastern 36 miles between Harriman and Crossville going to the Southern Railway. The track between Monterey and Crossville was dismantled by the Louisville and Nashville in the 1980s, and the Southern cut the line back to Crab Orchard in the 1990s, abandoning the 11 miles between there and Crossville. Both of these moves have proven to be very problematic to the recent advocates of the restoration of passenger train service between Nashville and Knoxville. The Nashville and Eastern Railroad was formed to revive the operation of the line's freight service to Old Hickory and Lebanon, approximately 30 miles east of Nashville, with occasional runs to points somewhat further east over the former L&N-owned Tennessee Central trackage. The Nashville and Eastern once participated in the operation of the Broadway dinner train out of Nashville, and today it hosts the Music City Star commuter rail service between Nashville and Lebanon. In the year 2000, the Nashville and Western Railroad was formed as a subsidiary of the Nashville and Eastern to take over the operation of the old Tennessee Central from Nashville to Ashland City, which was on a portion originally sold to the Illinois Central but was later operated by numerous short lines. By 2001, with the middle portion of the line already out of service, the Southern Railway successor, Norfolk Southern, wanted to abandon the line completely. The last remaining customer west of Rockwood was the Franklin Industrial Minerals. Franklin produces limestone and calcium carbonate products and is the largest producer of high calcium chemical limestone in the United States, and the railroad is vital to its operation. So, in order to preserve the rail service the company needed, Franklin Minerals bought the 16-mile line between Crab Orchard and Rockwood with interchange with NS made at Rockwood. Its railroad is a private carrier which uses the FIMX reporting marks and operates a small fleet of semi-famous ex-Southern Railway high hood B23-7 diesels, which is the spotlight of this video. Number 3999, whose NS heritage is obvious, is an ex-Southern that was built in 1981 and was bought by Franklin to be used as spare parts, and here it clearly shows. Number 3138 is the ex-CSX low nose number 3138, Nay Seaboard number 5149, Nay Seaboard Coastline number 5149 that was built in 1978. The 4023 is an ex-Minnesota commercial Nay Southern Railway unit before that and was also built in 1981. Rounding out the roster is a fourth high hood B23-7 number 4021 and a GE 110-ton center cab number 1297. The four operating units used to be painted in the very attractive gray and white with red trim scheme that you see here, which worked well given the never-ending limestone dust. But in 2006, Franklin Industries was sold to the Chemical Lime Company out of Fort Worth, Texas, which is part of the Lhoist Group headquartered in Limelet, Belgium, thus making Franklin Industrial Minerals a part of the Lhoist North America of Tennessee. In the summer of 2012, the ownership change began to show with the red units painted blue with the Lhoist logo, although Lhoist still uses the FIMX reporting marks and name. In 2015, the railroad leased an ex-Union Pacific GP38-2 GMTX number 2171 that became a favorite with the crews as opposed to the rail fans. The 38 was returned to its lessor in 2017 and the railroad bought an EMD diesel of its own. GP35U number 3043 is said to be built as the Rio Grande GP35 number 3033 and is no more popular with the rail fans than the leased GP38-2 was, and that's just the way it goes. From the time that the first road switcher was introduced in the 1940s, the high short hood was a feature found on most first-generation diesels. The high nose provided space for sandboxes, toilets, and steam generators that heated passenger trains. Some railroads chose to run their high hoods short hood forward while others ran them long hood forward. Of those railroads that ran their high hoods long hood forward, they often did so by request of the crews. The crews, you ask? Yes, the crews. Coming straight out of the steam era, many crews wanted the additional feeling of safety of having the longer hood out in front just like it was on steam engines, so that's how it was. By the early 1960s, the low-nose design was king, but a few railroads stuck with the high hood configuration. The Norfolk and Western and the Southern Railway are among the last roads that ordered the high hoods and took delivery of high short hoods all the way into the early 1980s. With that in perspective, it should come as no surprise that the only high hoods still operating on a Class 1 railroad in North America today are those that are still on the Norfolk Southern. The NS is a combination of the N&W and the Southern in case you're not hip to 21st century railroads. NS's high hood fleet remained steady as she goes for years, but over the last few years an aggressive and intensified push by NS to modernize its EMD units with new Admiral cabs has rapidly reduced the ranks of these four-axle misfits. Moreover, following the replacement by modernized mother slug sets at major switching yards and terminals, some 50 high hood GP38-2s were sold in late 2016 with more than 70 that were set to be auctioned off in August of 2017, which further thinned out their ranks. There are maybe 10 or so high hood SD40s that are still on NS, and I do mean maybe, so if you're looking to catch any of these 4 or 6 axle blacks before they're sold off or rebuilt, you'd better do it fast. Time is short for these 20th century survivors if you want to see them in their original form and in action. There was a group of 24 SD40-2s that were acquired from National Railway Equipment reporting mark NREX by Norfolk Southern in 2012 that had black number boards with white lettering instead of the usual white number boards with black lettering that are common to NS locomotives. The units numbers 3468 through 3491 had their number boards replaced by NRE with their new NS numbers prior to being delivered, resulting in the color reversal. Today, most are no longer on the NS roster. Number 3489 is one of that bunch, and it showed up all over eastern Pennsylvania. I first caught it in June of 2015 on train 31T in one of the best locomotive last ships that I've ever recorded. I caught it again in 2017 in Bloomsbury, New Jersey, heading east on the Lehigh line back to Allentown on local train H74 or H76. I can't remember exactly which one it was. I caught it yet a third time in Allentown proper on a mild winter's day, January 21, 2020. For now, it's seen here working the Allentown Hump yard during the last days of its operation. The Hump's operation, that is. A closer inspection shows that these two EMD SDs are in remote control operation. My first encounter with this engine came in June of 2015 on a clip many of you already know is coming. So without further delay, here it is for you again. On that same January 21, 2020 day, in another part of the yard, I stumbled across another NS predecessor in the form of SD40-2, number 6175, a former N&W unit that was built in 1978. Like I said earlier in this video, there are at least 4 different classes of ex-N&W SD40-2s on the Norfolk Southern. Here's another. Number 6205 is the very last of 131 former N&W SD40-2s that was built between 1975 and 1980. It's shown here in Enola Yard on January 16, 2016, and it looks just like any other SD40 on the ENS. Looking at it from the front, however, reveals the black and white zebra stripes on the front and rear pilots. These engines were typically used in yard and hump service, and both are shown in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The 6192, shown at the Juniata shops in May of 2017, is another of the class of 1980. On this day, she speaks to the heavens as she's given a load test by the top-notch folks of the Juniata shops. Another Eastern railroad that has a penchant for the 38s and the 40s is the Regional Reading and Northern. We're standing in the Mahanoy City Yard as the QAMC, that's the Tamaqua to Mount Carmel, also known as the Mountain Job, collects cars from Blashock Coal in Gilberton. When the Canadian Pacific was in town, train D14 was a local train between Taylor, Pennsylvania and Binghamton. This is one of only 2 of that symbol that I ever caught, and today's has a 38 and 40 combo providing the muscle. Another rarity besides the train itself are the 2 Wisconsin Central gondola cars up front, something rarely, if ever, seen on CP trains. This manifest contains 11 bipacks of double-stack well cars, 1,941 tons, and 3,750 feet of freight train headed north to Binghamton, New York. From Binghamton, the double stacks will be heading west to Chicago. The empty grain hoppers came off of the Delaware Lackawanna from Mount Pocono, and the empty 2-bay covered hoppers came off of the salt spur standing between us and the train. As you can see for yourself, it was an extremely windy day, so there's no good audio of the train. Instead, I'll give you some more information about the 38s and the 40s. Some Union Pacific SD40-2s were set up to run along with the Centennials and geared to run 79 miles per hour as opposed to the typical 70 miles per hour. The initial synopsis was to have SD40-2B units, but the decision was made to take existing locomotives, upgrade them to run faster, and put them behind the Centennials. Over time, Union Pacific began to run them in locomotive consists outside of the Centennials in 2s and 3s, in Utah, Nevada, and California. By the mid-1980s, the UP decided that while the special units had their uses, a more standard, uniform fleet was better, and many were rebuilt back to their original gearing. They were called the Fast 40s, and they were rebuilt in the late 70s to around 1987. Burlington Northern had more SD40-2s than any other railroad. They were known to run them in 2s and 3s, 4s, and even 5s throughout the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s. They were eventually replaced on coal trains by the SD70 Max. Most made it into the BNSF merger, and a few still wear their Cascade Green Burlington Northern paint to this day. NS and CSX rebuilt many of their SD40-2s with Admiral cabs for NS or SpongeBob Square cabs for CSX. CSX rebuilt theirs as SD40-3s. The Dash 3 is the latest evolution to the EMD electrical card system. It makes locomotives run better and more efficiently. Lots of railroads are switching to the Dash 3 systems, and CSX was one of the first railroads to do it. In the 2010s, they were looking for alternatives to motive power because the Tier 4 emissions deadlines were creeping up on them, and if CSX and the railroads in general wanted new locomotives, they would have to invest about $5 million per new locomotive from GE, which was a really steep price tag. So they went back to the drawing board and asked, what can we do with existing equipment to be more fuel efficient and cut down on emissions without having to spend $5 or even $6 million on a brand new locomotive? Their solution was the SD40-3s. The first 50 units were built in Huntington, West Virginia with an NRE, that's National Railway Equipment Design cab. They featured new air dryers and also had upgraded electronics in the cab. As mentioned before, they had climate control, HVAC systems that was a great upgrade from the factory specs, as the original locomotives didn't have AC, and that was a bane on those hot summer days in the South. The air start feature is a really neat thing too. It's a delayed start with some beeping, and then the prime mover turns over. The cabs were crash worthy, and they're unique with the anti-climbers and their overall look. On the CSX SD40-3s, they have an electronic air brake on the rear on a stand along with directional ditch lights. NS and CSX both have front and rear ditch lights on their SD40-2 rebuilds. NS was about a year behind CSX when they introduced their Curry Rail Admiral cab. The reason they were called the Admiral cab is because there was a Navy admiral who worked with NS on the board of directors, and he spent a lot of time sailing across the oceans, and one of the things that he noticed is that the windows of the ships were always slanted forward to prevent glare. Like CSX, NS Admiral cabs were designed for crashworthiness, so there was a lot of steel used, just like the Crescent cabs. NS has front and rear anti-climbers, and some units have electronic air brakes. Others still have the wheel. The Southern Railway SD40-2 high hoods had two different paint schemes, the early gold lettering and the deluxe 1979 yellow lettering. The Southern Railway engines had P3 and P5 air horns. In real life, the yellow and logos were reflective. They also had the electrical conduit for locotrol operation, as Southern Railway was one of the innovators of radio-controlled DPU operations that they developed in the 1960s. Louisville and Nashville GP40s were built in the 1960s, and some had 2,600-gallon fuel tanks, with others having larger fuel tanks. They had Leslie RS3L horns, and most made it into CSX and have been rebuilt to Dash 2 specs. Penn Central's 170 GP40s were leased, as they really couldn't afford to outright buy their motive power at the time. Their GP40s were leased for 15 years, and some ended up on the Rio Grande after the Conrail merger. Like their GP38s, they were pretty bare bones minimal, but they did have the RS3L horn. Before you go, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. Become a subscriber and be part of the crew if you haven't done that already, and drop a comment below if you have something that you can add to the conversation. I'll be back shortly with another video. Until then, stay safe out there.